Conservative radio host John Bernstein has a message for seniors. Risk your life to vote for Trump.
If these seniors can put a mask on or not, doesn't matter to me, and go to their grocery store or their bank and wait in line to do their business, then they can get up, get out of the house, and go down to the polling stations and vote in person. We need to make sure these seniors are voting in person.
All right, so he's very adamant about voting in person. Why is that? Well, we'll get to that. But first, I got a couple problems with some of his analogies, right? Hey man, if you can go to the grocery store and you can go to the bank, then of course you can go and vote, right? Okay, well, what is it? Why would you go to the grocery store? Well, you go there to get food, right? You kind of need food to survive, right? Banks. Well, I mean, you might think, well, do you need a bank to survive? Well, banks store money. You need money to pay your bills. Paying your bills, make sure that you have a home, that you have electricity, and that for example, that electricity. I can't believe I have to break this down for this guy. So that electricity powers something called a refrigerator where you store food. Food you need to survive. And so, yeah, it's kind of important to be able to go to the bank and also go to the grocery store. That said, we live in an age, a miraculous age, where we don't actually have to go to those places in person anymore, right? For example, you can order groceries online. So now, look, that still involves a person physically going and doing the shopping and then either dropping it off or having you come and pick it up in your car. And there's a certain amount of risk to the essential employee that usually has to do that. And that's fair to point out. It's not entirely a riskless endeavor. And we know that. That's why we wear masks, to go and mitigate that risk. And so understand, though, that there are ways around that. That there are ways, where if somebody who is a senior citizen or who has a condition, a pre-existing condition like diabetes, sorry. I get so used to saying it like that. Diabetes, or, hypertension, anything, heart problems, liver problem, kidney problem, whatever, right? You have a condition that makes you more susceptible to COVID-19. You at least have that option if you have the money to do so, if you're lucky enough to have that money to be able to order groceries to have them delivered, right? Okay, sure. And so not only that, but banking technology has really increased by a lot. I mean, you can go and do things online. You can bank online and not even have to step foot into a bank. I know it's crazy what you can do, right? And so voting is kind of the same way, right? Now, online voting, not a good idea, right? Why is that, Jeff? Because it's not exactly accountable. The results can be messed with a little bit too much. And so there are definite electoral or voter fraud situations when it comes to purely online voting. But you know where there aren't those problems, right? Absentee ballots and mail-in voting, which again allows you to not have to leave your house in order to cast your ballot, which is great for people who have compromised immune systems, who are older, who are more at risk. So now that said, right, Bernstein, the reason that he's pushing in person is because he thinks that all these different ways to vote that are not only more convenient, but actually also really safe and secure are not. They're rife with voter fraud, he says. Well, that's not true. It's not. Studies have actually shown that all forms of voting fraud are actually incredibly rare in the United States. For example, a national study back in 2016 found very few credible allegations of fraudulent voting. And even a panel that Trump charged with investigating election corruption found no evidence of voter fraud. Remember Donald Trump's voter fraud commission, right? He's like, oh, we're going to make this commission, right? And it's going to find all the voter fraud and it's going to put a stop to it. Well, that commission ran and they investigated. And what did they found? Diddly squat. They didn't find nothing. Nothing. No evidence of widespread voter fraud. And if Donald Trump's team can't find it, right? The team that he put together to go and find voter fraud that would help him make his case and help Republicans make their case that we should have not only voter ID, but all vote in person, right? And not have these mail-in ballots, which, by the way, have not been an issue until coronavirus. Ironically, right? Republicans had not been railing against absentee voting and mail-in voting until it became an acceptable part of the conversation because of coronavirus. They didn't have a problem with that, right? But they did have a problem with voter ID, and so they were trying to make that argument to push that. And so, yeah, they couldn't find it, though. They couldn't find any evidence of it because it doesn't exist. It's not a real thing. Charles Stewart III of Massachusetts Institute of Technology, or MIT, who, by the way, studies election and voter fraud, so he'd be kind of an expert on this. He says this: voting fraud in the United States is less rare is fraud using mail-in ballots. All right, well, there he goes. Mr. Stewart also pointed to several documented voting fraud cases in recent decades, because there's a handful of them, that involved mail or absentee ballots. Most recently, the race in North Carolina's 9th Congressional District back in 2018, when an operative who rounded up absentee ballots for the Republican candidate, Mark Harris, was charged with election fraud. The practice is known as ballot harvesting. So, okay. Now, on that, Mr. Stewart says, quote, "Their stories, they're dramatic. They are rare." All right. Well, there you go. And interestingly enough, all these attempts at voter fraud tend to get caught because, let's be honest, if you want to cheat your way into office, you're going to have to change a lot of votes. We're talking thousands, tens of thousands of votes, at least in national elections. Local elections, the margins can be much, much thinner. But something like that, a situation like that, where it is a razor-thin margin, well, that makes people a lot more wary. And so they look out for voter or electoral fraud even more in those situations. So if you had these weird spikes, people are going to notice. So that's really hard to pull off in those kinds of races. And then the only entities, of course, capable of doing something like that happen to be political campaigns. And the opposition, again, is going to be watching for that. So it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to try. With such a high likelihood of getting caught, why risk it? So now Richard L. Hassan, another elections expert at the University of California, Irvine School of Law, also agrees that voter fraud, especially through mail and absentee ballots, are few and far between. Quote, "Election fraud in the United States is very rare, but the most common type of such fraud does involve absentee ballots." And he says that sensible rules for handling of absentee ballots make sense, not only to minimize the risk of ballot tampering, but to ensure that voters cast valid ballots, as well as, of course, most important thing, having your vote counted. And so understand that we're okay with that. We're okay with common sense measures to make sure that, yes, that your vote is counted, especially if it's an absentee ballot. And there are a lot of issues right now with absentee ballots getting rejected too much. And we've seen that in Democratic primaries especially. And so, yeah, the system is not 100% perfect, and no system is. And we can definitely improve it. But fairly, for the most part, it works. It works, and it's secure. So, that said, I'm thinking that, the rhetoric against absentee ballots and vote by mail is not about voter fraud. Okay? Republicans are actually pretty open about their own reasons to oppose absentee ballots. In fact, President Trump tweeted this. He said, mail-in voting for whatever reason doesn't work out well for Republicans. He's basically just saying, for some reason, mail-in ballots, it still work for us, for Republicans. Sort of a way of saying, because I think that, it brings out like Democrats, it brings out more voters. And that's what that's about. In fact, Georgia, where the Secretary of State is mailing all voters absentee ballot requests for the May primary, the State House Speaker, David Ralston, a Republican, told a local news site that, quote, this will be extremely devastating to Republicans and conservatives in Georgia. This will certainly drive up turnout, not drive down, drive up. So wait, what's wrong with increased turnout? And by the way, I realized that was an older article from before the primary in Georgia, but nonetheless, right? So that's their problem with this. They do not want more people voting. It is the same old song and dance that you can hear from the OG supporter of voter suppression.
Now, many of our Christians have what I call the goo-goo syndrome. Good government. They want everybody to vote. I don't want everybody to vote. Elections are not won by a majority of people. They never have been from the beginning of our country, and they are not now. As a matter of fact, our leverage in the elections, quite candidly, goes up as the voting populace goes down.
Hey, man, that was one of theirs. Explicitly telling you, I don't want more voting because when more people vote, we lose. That holds true today. I mean, and that's, of course, why you have voter suppression. That's why you have gerrymandering. That's why you have all these attempts to stop people from voting. So now, back to Bernstein here, right? So now, Bernstein, hold on, let me get the right video. So now Bernstein, since he's consistently against absentee ballots and early voting, which, again, many conservatives have actually used. I believe Kayleigh McEnany has voted absentee. Donald Trump, of course. Mike Pence. Many more people have been, very, very, have used this, right? Very enthusiastically casting their ballots using the absentee system. Doesn't matter. Bernstein is more than happy to have older people pay the price for his convictions against expanding voting.
Now, here's the controversial part. Some of these folks may actually get sick, and that's sad, and it's unfortunate, and I hope that it doesn't happen. And some of them, yes, they may even die and pass away. So be it. I don't mean to be callous. I don't mean to be cruel. I don't mean to be insensitive. But we're not asking you to storm the beaches of Normandy here, and we're certainly not asking you to try to overtake, Hamburger Hill either. We're asking you to get out of the House and go down and vote for President Trump so that you can secure your children and your grandchildren's future to make sure that they live in the freedom that you have enjoyed as well. Okay?
Right.
Some people are going to die. So be it.
Well, actually, they don't need to.
I'm with the second guy. They don't need to. Yeah, they really don't. By the way, Hamburger Hill, right? Boy, what a reference, right? Donald Trump probably would rather have you storm Hamburger Hill. Just saying. All right, anyway. So, no, but you heard that, right? Sacrifice your life, to help Donald Trump win the election so that he can give more tax cuts to the rich, basically. I mean, look, let me tell you, neither of the candidates that are running, Democrat or Republican, are really worth throwing your life away. Let me just say that, okay? Not worth it. I mean, are you kidding me, though? Look, I know these guys are, conspiracy theorists. I mean, this guy, this is the first I've done on Mr. Bernstein, right? But just going through some of the titles of his videos, right? Like, oh, Democrats should be, sterilized. No, this guy's a nut. He's a complete insane person. But let me tell you what. You know what the real fraud is in our electoral system? The Electoral College, that we don't have an actual direct democracy, and the fact that we're not automatically registered to vote as citizens, that we have to go and register to vote every single time. Insane, right? No, we could do better, and we should be doing better, but we don't, because there are people who literally don't want others to vote. Now, I'm saying, and by the way, when I say that both the candidates are not worth throwing your life over, I'm not saying don't go out and vote. I'm saying that we should have things like, I don't know, mail-in voting. We should expand that. We should expand absentee ballots. It works everywhere it's been done. Oregon, they've had it for quite some time, and it works, and it's secure, and it's effective, and yes, everybody's able to vote. And so it also doesn't require you or anyone else to become exposed to COVID-19. And also, it doesn't make the sacrifice of grandma and grandpa to the markets necessary. And so those are all excellent reasons to support absentee ballots and, mail-in voting. And to forget about this guy.